10,000 Americans reported ringing in their ears after receiving the COVID-19 vaccine.
It's called tinnitus, but federal health officials say so far it is not a side effect. In an ABC 15 exclusive, investigator Melissa Blasius talks to tinnitus sufferers pleading for answers and treatment options.
Steve, first, there's overwhelming medical evidence that these COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective against a deadly virus. The people you're about to see say they are not anti-vaxxers nor anti-government. They just want to be heard and helped. It's louder than his car's stereo, and it's the sound Robert Edmonds can't get out of his head.
Yes.
Kind of sound?
Yes. It's a constant high-pitched ring.
This federal government employee came to Phoenix seeking a specialist, hoping for belief and relief for tinnitus that he says developed after receiving his COVID-19 vaccine. In Seattle, George Hu is kind of a COVID hero, helping create COVIDWA.com, a vaccine finder site for his entire state. George got his shot in February.
The very next morning, I noticed I started having what felt like congestion in my ear, and then it got worse by the second day, and the third day, I literally couldn't hear anything out of it.
A doctor prescribed steroids, and George's hearing returned, along with a ringing sound that persists to this day.
What you're going to get from me is the radical, transparent, blunt truth.
Mayo Clinic doctor Greg Poland tries to dispel myths about the COVID vaccine, but he's not willing to discount a connection between the vaccine and tinnitus. Why? He got it too.
I can't tell with absolute confidence that it was a result of the vaccine. I can only say that it happened an hour, hour and a half after getting the vaccine.
The ABC 15 investigators heard from people all over the country who said they reported sudden or worsening tinnitus to the CDC's Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS. In all, more than 10,000 Americans, including 217 Arizonans, reported. That's 1 out of every 21,000 people who got the COVID-19 vaccine.
It probably represents what's called an off-target inflammatory condition.
Dr. Elizabeth Connick agrees. She's chief of infectious diseases at the University of Arizona.
Well, they're not making it up, and it's very important not to have them feel marginalized.
The European Union's equivalent to the FDA, called the European Medicines Agency, looked at data from both clinical trials and the initial vaccine rollout, and they're now recommending the Johnson & Johnson-Janssen COVID-19 vaccine add tinnitus to its list of possible side effects. Here in the U.S., the FDA and CDC have also been looking at the data, and they've actually associated the vaccine with several rare but serious potential adverse health effects, except tinnitus. They say there's no causal relationship between this condition and the vaccine. Diving deeper, lots of things can cause tinnitus, including head injury, sinus congestion, stress, anxiety, autoimmune diseases, and high blood pressure. Plus, ear ringing conditions are so common. The CDC estimates nearly 15% of the general public, over 50 million Americans, experience some form of tinnitus.
Some people spontaneously have hearing changes or have tinnitus or increase their tinnitus for a reason that we cannot explain.
Dr. Susan Schmidt says you'd have to rule out everything else in order to link a patient's tinnitus to the vaccine. The post-vaccine tinnitus sufferers we spoke with sought medical care, but they said providers were reluctant to believe them and unsure about the best treatments. Online support groups also hit roadblocks. George says Facebook shut down his group.
This is something that some people think is misinformation, but it is the truth. It is actually happening.
Some medical providers urge the FDA, CDC, and researchers to be open-minded and fully investigate these vaccine recipients' symptoms.
If there are side effects, we need to educate the public about them. We need to know about them so we can give people the right advice.
Now, 6 months after his latest COVID shot, Robert's tinnitus has quieted significantly. Knowing what you know now, would you have gotten the vaccine?
I would have gotten the vaccine. I just wish my doctors knew how to treat it, and I wish I knew to go and see a doctor sooner.
Don't try to play games with the devil. Don't humor the devil. Don't go to the devil and say, ha ha, devil, I am smarter than you. Don't do that, because then you're chasing after the devil. See, the devil is very intelligent. The devil is very smart and cunning. He was able to convince Eve, was he not? So take every thought captive in your mind that comes into your personal mental dome. You are not God, but you live inside this body right now. That's your temporary home. You are a spiritual being having an earth experience. Who runs this world? Lucifer is the god of this world. Is Lucifer the creator of the all? No. He only has control of what's inside the dome, the earth dome. And that includes your mental dome. He could get inside your head. Now, who has control over your physical body? Does the corporate entity, the CES2EQV and the Vatican and the Papal Bull run you? Or are you free? Are you sovereign? Are you of this land? Are you know, a free being, natural law? Don't chase the devil. Don't try to outsmart him, because this is his world. God temporarily gave him dominion and said, hey, you could have this world and you could try to convince my people to come with you, but you can't kill him. Can't kill him. And so the devil's like, okay, shoot, I'll take earth, and you know, I can't kill him, but I can put bad thoughts in their head. So the devil operates through people. Demons and all that operate through people. It's a spiritual battle. A demon can jump from person to person. That's why our battle isn't against other people. Those people are temporarily oppressed or possessed. They are not in their right mind, and we are not to engage with them to make it worse. That's not what we were called to do. We're called to help one another. So don't play with the devil. Mind control is real, and it comes in many, many forms. There's government mind control, there's people mind control in real life, there's spiritual mind control. Who's in control of your mental dome? This is your mental dome. Have you capped your own brain? Have you convinced yourself of things that weren't true because external factors convinced you that you're not you? Come on, who's running your life? Silent weapons for quiet war. What do you think this is? You see the world and the state it's in right now and the stuff that's going on, and you could just see the cycle repeating. Break the chain. Repent. Take control of your own soul. Take accountability for where you are right now. It's like, damn, wherever you are, I'm not in the best mental state, and I'm holding myself accountable. I'm judging me. Because I have to have a correct soul if I really want to grow and change, because I don't want to repeat old behaviors, because then I'm just going to have to repeat it again. And then you just extend your misery. Learn your lessons, grow, and your life will improve. Don't become stagnant. Get up and move. Mind control is real, but it comes in many forms. That's why God tells us about, you know, staying close to Him and taking those outside thoughts and processing if they come from us or not. If they don't, throw them out. You've just seen a few things that I've added in this video clip just to give you a brief overview of some of this. How many of you actually watch this? I have no idea. I hope somebody does, you know, because it's very hard on my soul to make these videos. I can't lie. Sometimes it takes me a very long time, because not because I don't know the information, but because it breaks my heart to talk about certain things. But I realize I have to face my fears head on. And one of my fears is public speaking, reading. I love public speaking, but I hate reading out loud. I hate it. Work on yourself. Continue to grow. And know that this world isn't it. And karma comes back around. What you do now will have an effect. Make sure it's positive. Make sure you're planting good seeds. It all starts with one small step, and I'm not talking about space. I'm talking about your mental dome. I love you guys. Discover. The brain, ringing in the ears, actually goes much deeper than that. In some of the world's oldest medical texts, papyrus scrolls from ancient Egypt, clay tablets from Assyria, people complain about noise in their ears. Some of them call it buzzing. Others describe it as a whispering or even singing. Today, we call such conditions tinnitus. In the distant past, doctors offered all sorts of strange cures for it. The Assyrians poured rose extract into the ear through a bronze tube. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder suggested that earthworms boiled in goose grease be put in the ear. Medieval Welsh physicians in the town of Midfi, I'm not sure how you say it, my apologies, recommended that the patient take a freshly baked loaf of bread, out of the oven, cut it in two, and apply it to both ears as hot as can be borne. Bind and thus produce perspiration, and by the help of God, you can be cured. Early physicians based these prescriptions on what they believed tinnitus to be. Some were convinced it was caused by wind that got trapped inside the ear and whirled around endlessly, so that they tried to liberate the wind by drilling a hole into the bones of the ear or using a silver tube to suck air out of the ear canal. The treatments didn't work, but they did have some internal logic. Today, tinnitus continues to resist medicine's best efforts, despite being one of the more common medical disorders. Surveys show that between 5 and 15% of people say they have heard some kind of phantom noise for 6 months or more. Some 1 to 3% say tinnitus lowers their quality of life. Tinnitus can force people to withdraw from their social life, make them depressed, and give them insomnia. Some modern doctors prescribe drugs like lidocaine. Others offer patients cognitive therapy. Some have people listen to certain sounds. Others apply magnetic pulses to the brain and even implant electrodes into the brain stem. Although many treatments have shown some promise, none is consistently effective. Recent research suggests why. Tinnitus is a lot more complicated than just ringing in the ears. It's more like a ringing across the brain. Normally, we hear sound only when they make our eardrums vibrate. The vibrations cause nerve hairs in the inner ear to shiver, and that triggers electric signals to travel along the auditory nerve to the brain. One of their first stops is a patch of gray matter called the auditory cortex. Each nerve hair is tuned to a particular frequency of sound and excites only certain neurons in the auditory cortex. As a result, the neurons in the auditory cortex form what is known as a tone map. The neurons at one end of the auditory cortex are tuned to low frequencies. The farther you go towards the other end, the higher the tuning of the neurons. This sound system comes with an elaborate feedback mechanism. Neurons can do more than just relay signals forward in the brain. They also signal back down the line, reaching out to neighboring neurons, turning the nearby frequencies, exciting some and muzzling others. These feedback controls allow us to sift through incoming sounds for the most important information so that we are not overwhelmed by meaningless noise. In young brains, the neurons and their backed controls grow and link up to each other. Even in adulthood, experiencing new sounds can rewire the auditory cortex. If a rat is trained to recognize sound at a particular frequency, the corresponding region of the tone map will get bigger. Tinnitus arises when this flexibility goes bad. Things may start to go awry when toxic drugs, loud noises, or even whiplash cause damage to the nerve hairs in the ears. The injured nerve hairs can no longer send signals from the ears to the tone map. Bereft of incoming signals, the neurons undergo a particular transformation. They start to eavesdrop on their neighbors, firing in response to other frequencies. They even start to fire sometimes without any incoming signals. As the brain feedback controls get rewired, the neurons end up in a self-sustaining loop, producing a consistent ringing. That is why tinnitus often doesn't go away when people get their auditory nerve surgically cut. It's not just the auditory cortex that is affected when people get tinnitus. Neuroscientists using increasingly sophisticated brain scans are finding that changes ripple out across the entire brain. Winfield Schlee of the University of in Germany there, and his colleagues have been making some of the most detailed studies of tinnitus ever, using a method called magnetoencephalography, MEG for short, MEG. They take advantage of the fact that every time neurons send each other signals, their electric current creates a tiny magnetic field. MEG allows scientists to determine such changing patterns of brain activity in the brain 100 times per second. Schlee and his colleagues find widespread differences in the brain of people with tinnitus and those without it. A network of regions in the brain of people with tinnitus tend to fire their neurons in sync. Schlee has determined that his tinnitus-stricken objects have a more synchronized pattern of signals coming out of regions in the front and to the back of the brain. For brain anatomy junkies, they are the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, orbital frontal cortex, and anterior cingulate cortex in the front. In the back, there is the precuneus and the posterior cingulate cortex. Pardon me if I didn't say it completely right. I'm, a little rusty here. It's been a while. Schlee and his colleagues also discovered a more strongly synchronized flow of signals coming into the temporal cortex, a region that includes the auditory cortex in people with tinnitus. When Schlee compared people who suffered a lot of distress from tinnitus with those who are not much bothered by it, he found that the more distress people felt, the stronger the flow of signals out of the front and the back of the brain into the temporal cortex. This pattern suggests that the network Schlee discovered is important for the full experiences of tinnitus. Tinnitus, in other words, extends beyond the ear, beyond the hearing specialized part of the brain, beyond even any single piece of neural real estate. It is a disease of networks that span the brain. Sounds like net neural monitoring, don't it? Such complexity may explain why so many different tinnitus treatments work, but only modestly. Each attacks just part of the tinnitus network. Christo Pantev of the University in Germany and his colleagues, for example, have brought some relief to people with tinnitus by rewiring their tone map. To do so, they edited recordings of music, filtering out the frequencies of the ringing in the ears of the patients, who then listened to filtered music on average of 12 hours per week. Pantev and his colleagues found that these patients' tinnitus significantly eased. They also found that the neurons tuned to the tinnitus frequency in the auditory cortex becomes less active. See, all this sounds like the MK videos I did on how to use sine waves and how people are programmed through the subconscious and the airwaves and the sine waves, but people, for some reason, seem to think it's a joke. Anyway, the scientists cannot say for sure how the filtered music soothes their patient, but they speculate that the incoming signals encourage the tone map to change its structure. The overreactive eavesdropping neurons become stifled by their neighbors. Clearly, the auditory cortex is just an early stop of the journey that sound takes from the outside world to our awareness. Some neurons in the auditory cortex extend branches down to the brainstem, where they link to a pair of regions called the caudate nucleus and the putamen, however you say it. These regions may be important for processing the signal in several ways, such as categorizing sounds. In 2004, Louis Lowry, an ear, nose, and throat doctor of Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, discovered that the caudate and the putamen played an important role in tinnitus by studying an unusual patient himself. As a young man, Lowry spent a summer working on a farm with a noisy tractor. The experience left him with partial hearing loss and a high-pitched ringing in his ear that plagued him for over 40 years. Sounds like he was lost in the desert for 40 years. Then at age 63, yes, that's a definite number, Lowry suffered a mild stroke. A CT scan and an MRI revealed that the stroke had damaged his caudate and putamen, but the stroke also brought a pleasant surprise. Lowry was completely cured of his tinnitus without any further hearing loss. Stephen Chung and I'm not sure if that's how you say it, and Paul Larson, two doctors at the University of California in San Francisco, set out to reproduce Lowry's experience. They took advantage of the fact that some people with Parkinson's disease get electrodes surgically implanted in their brainstem to control their symptoms. The electrodes typically have to pass the caudate and putamen to reach their target. I don't know why I can't say that word, and I'm sorry I got the Moses stutter, you guys, but we're trying to come out of Egypt. We are trying. Chewing and Larson engaged 5 patients preparing to receive an implant who also suffered from tinnitus. The patients agreed to undergo several minutes of deep brain stimulation to those regions during surgery as the electrode was being implanted. Chang and Larson reported that the tinnitus became much fainter in 4 of the 5 patients. Once signals travel from the ear to the auditory cortex, caudate and putamen, whatever, they eventually make their way to regions of the brain that carry out more sophisticated sound information processing, connecting the sounds with memories, interpreting their meaning, giving them emotional significance. It is precisely these regions that Schlee and his colleagues noted were behaving strangely in people with tinnitus. Man, I've done so many videos on this stuff, on breakdowns of how that works. He argues that it is only when signals reach this large-scale network that we become conscious of sound, and it is only at this stage that tinnitus starts to cause people to see, that is real torment. I can't even talk. Sorry. That tinnitus starts to cause people real torment. Yes, torment. Schlee's results suggest that the inner regions of the brain send their own feedback to the auditory cortex, amplifying its false signals. Schlee's model of tinnitus and consciousness could explain some curious observations. Even in bad cases of tinnitus, people can become unaware of the phantom sound if they are distracted. It may be that distractions deprive the errant signals from the auditory cortex of the attention they need to cause real distress. What's more, some of the most effective treatments for tinnitus appear to work by altering the behavior of the front of the brain. Counseling, for example, can make people better aware of the sounds they're experiencing by explaining the brain process that may underlie the disorder, so they can consciously reduce their distress. Yes, unprogrammed from the mind control, binaural beats are a great thing, and they certainly do help. Solving the mystery of tinnitus will probably get even more urgent in years to come. Traffic, iPods, and other features of modern life may cause more hearing damage, hence more tinnitus. But if a real cure comes, it will probably not be a single silver bullet. It will instead attack the tinnitus network from top down and bottom up. For now, though, you should probably skip the hot bread on the ears. Mind control is real, you guys. Mind control is real. Who is controlling your reality and your world? Are you allowing the outside voices to influence your life, the outside sounds? Since I've read this article and it explains a bit about how these sciences work, I'm hoping that it will wake a few people up to the reality of what's going on out here. For some, this is a blessing. For others, it's a curse. But just be awake so you don't get lost and end up simply as money in their purse. Let's take a look back. April 14th, 2021. Something I had wrote out because I'm very familiar with mind control, unfortunately. So this was April 14th, 2021. Be careful of the mind control and manipulation tactics of the enemy and learn how to recognize the signs. There are many forms of MK techniques. Below, I have listed and written out some basic overviews to introduce those unfamiliar. People who are often called conspiracy theorists or tinfoil hat wearers or flat earthers are often truth tellers and risk speaking out at the cost of being called a whistleblower or threatened. Many of whom were born either into elite families, satanic ritual abuse survivors, star seeds, moon children, military programmed, contracted employees, and other government parties. Governing parties, pardon me. One thing MK does, it's designed to trigger a specific synaptic response via word recall, sounds, bells, automated calls, hand signals, facial expressions, colors, and other pre-programmed hypnotic, hallucinogenic triggers set long ago by a handler or a group or a team. Unfortunately, many elites have access to individual mind captive books and data which contain individual medical records, programs, memory files, access codes, and trigger cue words to use with active MK Ultra victims, which they can purchase and use like video games, except it's real life. These things are available. You can watch videos on people who have people in their life controlling them through net neural monitoring. They do gang stalking. So there's different types of stuff. People most susceptible to hidden triggers are people with current active trauma. So if you have trauma being caused, like this whole CV thing is causing people to go into trauma. It's causing them to act on their reptilian brain, which is your fight or flight mode versus your inner soul. So people most susceptible to hidden triggers are people with current active trauma, people with PTSD issues, those who've suffered ritual abuse. These people are generally selected and used as pawns and rooks on the earth chessboard as the scapegoat for an upcoming ritual, mental or physical, sacrifice of some sort, publicly displayed. Now look at the time of year it is right now. It's September, it's a holy month. So of course people extra try to do things that are nefarious because, well, it's a, holy time. Trauma regression is a gateway to unlocking hidden keys planted deep within the subconscious mind, where memories and data reside behind hidden firewalls, memory firewalls and blocks. Information can be extracted from the victim's mind unbeknownst to them and used by certain cults, lodges, organizations, affiliated programs, and of people of nefarious nature in dark places for whatever devious purposes they may have. Survivors of ritual abuse often have a hard time expressing their traumas. I'm one of them. Due to lack of proper coping skills, yes, I struggle with that. Due to narcissistic and abusive parental and familial teachings. Mental blocks, forgetfulness, and fear are often signs of undealt with trauma. Please have compassion for yourself and for others. We're all going through stuff. We're all trying to be delivered. Learn to heal from your traumas versus subconsciously projecting out the same reaction. Break the chain. Be a chain breaker. So now I will break his yoke bar from upon you, and I will tear off your shackles. For he has shattered gates of bronze and cut bars of iron asunder, saying, touch not my anointed and do my prophets no harm. See, I'm thankful for the covering of God. I'm always thankful that He shows me in advance, and I pay attention. I try to walk a narrow path these days, because in these end days, some people might want to be out sleeping, but me, I'm keeping my oil lamp full. And I recommend you do the same versus staying asleep and being used as the fool or the pawn in these people's tool.